Excuse me.
Is one of the best college. IIT has placed and made a record placement of 1,750 people.
Join number one ranked institute, NIET Greater Noida. Get future ready.
Hello everyone. I welcome you all to today's webinar on topic Trust, Future and Blockchain. And I hope
One ranked
everyone is doing great.
Greater Noida. Get future ready.
I welcome you all to today's webinar on topic Trust, Future and Blockchain. And I hope everyone is doing great. My name is Dr. Priyanka Chandani from Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology. It is one of the premier engineering and management institutes of Uttar Pradesh. And very proudly, I am saying that it is the only institute in UP to be recognized by all three ranking and accrediting government organizations. We are 6 program NB accredited, NAC A grade and NIRF ranked in the band 200 and 250. So dear all, you all are a part of webinar series titled Career Series 2020, happening at NIT during this month. The aim of this series is to facilitate students to plan their career aspirations and goal in the light of current happenings in IT world. So before I introduce our distinguished speaker, I would like to say that if you have any questions, just feel free to write in the chat box and we'll be addressing them towards the end of the session. Also, we can take few in between and do the follow-ups for remaining questions. The session is also being live streamed on YouTube and Facebook, and we have a good number of audience with us on social. So I welcome you all on behalf of NIT. So now I'm pleased to introduce our today's speaker, Mr. Shrikant Challa, Senior Director, Blockchain, Infosys Limited. Mr. Shrikant is the worldwide head of Infosys Blockchain Market Solutions, Business Development, in partnership responsible for driving enterprise awareness and adoption of blockchain across industry segments. Along with the technical and solution prowess of Infosys, he has been instrumental in developing industry value realization framework for blockchain networks. Prior to this role, he managed enterprise integration, business analytics, and enterprise architecture practices with Infosys and others serving Fortune 500 clients. Mr. Shrikant holds a bachelor degree in mechanical engineering from Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University in Hyderabad, India, an MBA from MIT Ceylon School of Management, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and is a fellow at System Design and Management Department at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge, US. So, dear participants, he is an accomplished expert on blockchain, learning and practicing best-in-class principles since the word blockchain got known to us. So again, you've got a golden opportunity to widen your knowledge on blockchain. So please listen carefully, and I'm sure it'll help you nurture your growth plan. So without any delay, we can start with the session. So over to you, Mr. Shrikant.
Thank you very much, Priyanka. Thanks for that very generous introduction. I am not sure if I can keep up to that level of expectation. So get your expectations down. Hopefully, I'll be able to meet some of those things. Welcome everyone from wherever you're joining. Good afternoon, good morning. It's an early start for me here in Boston. So if I'm a little bit groggy and it's a little cloudy, it is because it's not yet. The day hasn't yet completely begun here for us. But in any case, I appreciate Priyanka for putting this together. I think this is a great initiative to help students understand the opportunities and opportunities that lie at the intersection of new technologies and what career paths they can pursue. So this is a great way to bring awareness amongst the student community and also help the market, right? Help the businesses because what actually is important 4 years down the road, education becomes an important element to bringing what market needs 4 years down the road. So I commend you for your forward thinking and the Institute of Engineering and Technology for putting this together. So I've been asked to talk about blockchain. I was contemplating on bringing a few slides, but then I decided that I want to take the challenge of explaining it without a slide, because that's a critical piece, right? I think this is one of those technologies which is quite interesting, nebulous, and confusing, promising at the same time, and one that has a lot of buzz, if not too much. So with that, let me give a short history of blockchain, where it started. I'm sure quite a few of you here on this call, on this webinar, are already aware of some, if not all, aspects of blockchain and its implementations. Some of them are worldwide implementations that are very powerful. To me, and I started working on blockchain perhaps roughly about 5 years ago. Not necessarily working, but just getting interested in it, understanding what it actually can deliver through the lens of Bitcoin to begin with. And my focus or my interest from day one has been, how might this technology help enterprises? How might this technology help businesses? So that was the lens, that was the orientation that I had. And I started working on it, started getting networking with folks around here at the university, and then eventually we at Infosys started developing our own practice, which is what I'm leading up now. Now, when it comes to the history, right, this is one of the very fascinating technologies to me, right? By far, arguably, a simple 8-page paper created by a pseudonym called Satoshi that was released in the midst of the financial crisis as a feasible alternative to existing systems that have arguably existed for ages, right? Like centralized currency and central banks. So the very fact that such a small white paper, which has come out from such an obscure source, has reached such high prominence, and today it has been touted as one of the greater technologies, one of the important technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. So that is interesting. In fact, noteworthy are 2 points in that paper, right? When I think about that, the first and foremost is the simplicity of the entire paper itself. It was written out without much complicated explanation. It was written out with very simple language, a very clear explanation of how to implement a decentralized system. And the second most important thing was the timing of the proposal itself, right? It did not float, when the stock market was at high, or when the economy or the world economy was facing some other challenges, be it global trade, geopolitical stresses, or whatnot. It was introduced at a time when the trust in the financial services industry across the world was at its low since we've had a financial services industry, since we've had a centralized system for anything. And that's the world of blockchain, right? That is where Bitcoin came into being. If we walk down the memory lane in 2008, right, some of the highlights, or more aptly, lowlights of that time period was a rapidly collapsing financial system, that phenomenon being a global phenomenon, rightly so, trust or lack of trust being a very, very central part of the financial systems around the world. And this was happening at a time when we were witnessing domino effect, right? You would have one major firm after another major firm in financial services, topple in the US, and then halfway around the world, similar things would happen in India or in Europe or in UK, and then the cycle continued, which perhaps a lot of you are young to note, but I remember very clearly sitting on my computer working out in the West Coast in Los Angeles, and seeing this continuous dwindling of the economy worldwide. It was a very rapid and a rampant thing, right? Now that was a time when there was a question of, could there be a system? Could there be a system that is less dependent on humans, less dependent on any single entity, that could ensure a similar or a higher level of trust for all of its participants compared to what the current centralized systems offer, which is, for example, central banks, with a lower transaction cost, and which is less likely to be gamed by a few, right? Which was sort of the central theme of what happened in the 2008 crisis. This was very attractive, right? At least for a few of them, it was very attractive. Not necessarily that on day one, Bitcoin has reached any level of significance in terms of adoption. And arguably, even today, it has not. It's a very small sliver. I think if you take the entire market capitalization of Bitcoin, it is just a rounding error in what the markets, the capital markets or the equity markets in the world operate in. However, what it did do is it provided an alternative means to do the transaction where you can trust, very importantly, something that was as important as transaction of money, store of money, or store of value. And that's really the world of Bitcoin. That's where things started in 2008. It ended up beginning with some gray areas or shady transactions in certain spaces, but eventually it has reached prominence. Now, if you fast forward to 10 years, right, what we are witnessing today is a rise of adoption of this technology, blockchain specifically, in both the consumer as well as the enterprise world. Consumer world being, anything to do with peer-to-peer payments, peer-to-peer file sharing, music, any number of these different use cases that you can think of where you access and or share data over your palm device, over your handheld mobile phone, smartphone, versus an enterprise adoption where businesses around the world are looking at ways in which this technology can actually bring efficiencies to the market, get a lot of benefit for one, for the business first, and then second thing is as a consequence to their consumers also. One could characterize, right, if you think about the evolution of blockchain, right, I would say that there's 3 phases of blockchain in the last 10 years. Starting out with Bitcoin, primarily focused on payments and store of value. All it did was just capture the transactions in a decentralized fashion with no single entity having the full control on the transactions and it being a democratized decentralized system. That followed by programmable blockchains. The example of that is Ethereum network, which is where you not only were able to capture and store data on a ledger, but you're also able to do actions or able to fulfill contracts because of that data. And then the third stage is truly the decentralized ledgers, which is more sort of general sense of these technologies that are both used for enterprise purposes and also have the scale of running these systems at an enterprise grade level, which means that having the performance, meeting the latency requirements, being able to scale, providing the safety and security, fulfilling the mandatory regulatory guidance that is there across the board. Now, each of these 3 phases, right, the Bitcoin phase followed by the Ethereum phase and now the broader DLT phase, each of them are important. They're important because they progressively improved or increased the awareness of the technology amongst everyone, right? Be it for good or be it for bad, right? I always tell people that the volatility and the price of Bitcoin is a very good thing because when it goes up, people think about it and talk about it. And when it goes down, people think about it and talk about it. There's no bad publicity. There's only publicity. So that's good. Bitcoin has definitely done that because everybody has had the awareness of what this is. Now, the other aspect is the confidence, right? Over a period of time, slowly but surely, enterprises, large businesses started building confidence that, well, this technology can actually serve some purpose for us. While there are a lot of use cases on the consumer side, it is the enterprise applications of blockchain that are of particular interest. Something that is a focus for a company like us, and something that actually will drive the markets in the future, and therefore an important element of deciding or thinking about blockchain as a career path. Blockchain as an educational skill set that you gain, which allows you to create for yourself a career in the future. Because consumer apps, they will continue to be rapidly expanding, but there's only so much in terms of value to be made out of those things. It's when enterprises actually adopt these technologies at a rapid pace that the demand side of the skill for or the need for blockchain, engineers, architects, testing professionals, economists who are actually trying to think through how does the introduction of blockchain have an effect or impact on the economic aspects of any particular ecosystem that you take. All of these things will come to being when the enterprise adoption happens. Now, at its core, right, what is this technology, right? I think there hasn't been nothing new since 2008 or in 2008 when the paper was released. by Satoshi Nakamoto, right? All of the technologies, all of the core elements of what made up Bitcoin on that day have already been in existence for quite some time. At the core, the technology is nothing but an append-only ledger that is immutable, meaning that you cannot change data once you add data to it. It is distributed and doesn't have a single owner. And you can store data, and so can you store contracts. Now, what does that mean, right? Contracts, what is a contract, right? If you think about anything that happens in the world, right, it is a transaction that involves at least two parties. Think about something as simple as, your milkman delivering milk to your doorstep early in the morning, or a newspaper boy delivering newspaper in the morning, or you going to a school and getting your education. All of these, while on a day-to-day basis, they seem to be straightforward, rather mundane activities. They are all, actually contracts between individuals and entities. The contract between the dairy farm, the milkman in between, and you is that you pay upfront, and they will deliver a certain amount of milk, which is not spoiled, on a daily basis at a certain time on your doorstep. That contract has to be honored. How will that get honored? At the end of the month, you only get to pay the milkman if you know that he is delivered for 31 days. What if he's only delivered for 20 of the 31 days? You will not pay. But now the question about, well, no, I delivered for 25 days might come or arise from the milkman versus, you as the consumer or the customer saying that, nah, you only delivered for 20 days. That confusion or that lack of trust of data is what causes a lot of contracts to be difficult to be enforced. And that's where blockchain comes, right? Essentially, if there is a way to establish every single physical activity that happens in a time-stamped fashion without the ability or by minimizing the ability to go back in time and for any one party to go and fudge or change that data, then the data becomes constant, and then the truth about what happened is easier to establish. Now, once you're able to establish the data and the truth, executing the contract becomes a very simple thing, because now you have non-refutable data available and you can execute the contract. It could be that, it's 25 rupees on a liter of milk, and then multiply it with whatever is your consumption, and then you get it. You can execute it immediately. In fact, that contract itself can make or lend its way into creating autonomous systems, meaning that as the individual, in this case, the milkman, fulfills his end of the contract, which is delivering the 1 liter packet of milk on the last day of the month, that automatically can trigger the payment without the need or necessity for him to bring a bill or a receipt to you a few days or a week later and ask you for the money again. Now, in a simplistic word, like what I've explained, right, that there is an efficiency that you can see that a system like this can bring in. There's obviously an overhead because you're thinking about systems and whatnot. We'll speak about that later on, but there's an efficiency. Now you can, expand this into global trade, expand this into global remittances, expand this into supply chains of the world where goods and services are created, manufactured, or rendered in one part of the world and serviced or actually consumed in the other part of the world across various jurisdictions, trade barriers, and so on and so forth. There are so many inefficiencies in any market, be it in India, be it in Europe, be it in the US, be it in financial services, be it in manufacturing, be it in something as simple as commodities like rice and wheat. There are inefficiencies everywhere, and those come into play because individuals or entities do not trust each other enough, and as a byproduct of that, it causes for a large set of reconciliation to happen, verification to happen, and eventually a lot of challenges or questions about whether or not something was actually done the way it is done. Now, just bringing back, right, the broad concept of blockchain itself, right, has many applications. One of the most simplest, easiest, first application of the technology is in the scope or in the realm of money, which is Bitcoin. Since Bitcoin, there's been 2,000 odd cryptocurrencies that have been deployed around the world, each having its own set of challenges and whatnot. Trade is another important use case, compliance, regulation, sustainability. Just take the example, right? We go and purchase quite a lot of interesting things for our kids. If you think about the developed or the developing world, you go and purchase toys for your kids, but oftentimes a kid probably the same age as yours, or maybe even younger than that, has put a lot of sweat and labor into it in very terrible conditions in order to manufacture that little toy. So sustainability, right? How do I ensure that this dollar or the rupee that I'm spending is not causing problems somewhere else? Reduction of fraud. There are many more use cases, right? As a matter of fact, I would argue that could you imagine a world without TCP/IP? And I don't know how many of you guys remember or even recall TCP/IP, but the conversation that we're having today, with me sitting halfway around the world and with you all from various parts of the country in India, is made possible by the TCP/IP protocol. But we don't think about TCP/IP. We think about Microsoft Teams and that there is a webinar. It's a very, very pervasive technology in that sense, right? It has made its way across the board. And that, I believe, is where the future of blockchain is going to go into, which is people will not know. In fact, success is dependent on when you do not know actually that there is a blockchain behind something, but it becomes an innate and integral part of everything that we do in our life. Now, as I stand here today, I'm asked to speak about opportunities, right? I think, with the brief history that I've given and some context of where things are and how things are moving, I'm sure you guys have had, opportunity to research and look up what things are, what kinds of use cases and what kinds of developments are happening in the world of blockchain. But just to give an example or a few examples, right? Governments around the world are now strongly thinking and deploying blockchain in a number of different use cases. Financial services industry, big banks, not the central banks, just the commercial banks and the retail banks, are deploying it in order to bring in efficiencies in their operations, in their reconciliation processes. Central banks around the world, RBI in India, Bank of England, ECB, or the Federal Reserve in the US, central banks are taking note of how this technology can actually be very disruptive and change the concept of money itself for sure. And therefore, there is this big project called CBDC, which is Central Bank Digital Currency Initiative, that has been led by over a dozen countries around the world in trying to understand and figure out what should be the regulatory environment in a world where dollar or rupee becomes more it's transacted over a distributed ledger. Now, many things happen, as we expect. World keeps changing. There is business cycles that happen, but one thing that I think is very, very prominent, something that will stick and be remembered for over the next at least 100 years, is the pandemic that we're going through, right? The last 6 months, if anything, has been unexpectedly different. A lot of scientists predicted it, but still it caught the world by surprise. It caught the world economy by surprise and has brought everything to a grueling stop. Right? Several things that we had already happened or happening, right? Very significant things, such as, the world markets typically work on an equilibrium of demand and supply. But now all of a sudden, with the pandemic, there's been a very, very strong shock on demand and supply and mismatches thereof. Stockouts of essentials like toilet paper and disinfectants have become like everyday things. There's a need for trust in everything that we do, right? What you get, where you get it from, who is touching it, everything that comes into our lives, we're very, very cautious about it. And the world is now looking for a business or running business as usual, where physical contact of people, touching of surfaces, everything can be minimized, if not completely eliminated. A simple example is, interesting that, I had, as soon as the pandemic had ensued, and then we had the lockdown of sorts in the US, my bank sent me a message saying that I'm sending you a credit card which is contactless. By the way, US is far behind in terms of credit card technology. I only got my chip card just probably sometime last year. But it was, these kinds of events will actually accelerate the adoption of technology. And such is the case with the current COVID pandemic and blockchain. There's just a few examples, right, in terms of where things are and how the world is changing. I think the acceleration for everything becoming digital is already in play, and it has only been, speed in it has only been, put into fast forward mode because of the blockchain, because of the COVID-19 crisis. Now, if you think about blockchains, right, or distributed ledgers, at its core, what are they doing, right? They are actually enabling trust. Everything that you do, right, you need to trust somebody, you need to trust some entity. You go to an ATM, you put your debit or credit, your ATM card, and you draw money from that. You're trusting the bank, you're trusting the paper that comes out of it, you're trusting that facility that nobody is going to be, stealing money from you. So there's a lot of trust in every little thing that we do. It is just that we don't realize it because it becomes such an important and, sort of a underpinning thing for everything. The other thing is this trust crosses geographies. This trust crosses functional boundaries, and it is timeless, right? And in the sense that, anything that we do today, we trust the bank in turn trusts the RBI in turn might trust something else, and so on. So there are unquestionable number of entities that get involved in anything. And in a future where, when we're on the other end of this pandemic, the post-COVID world of ours, it's likely that, that world is going to have is going to be more sensitive. It is going to be more, people are going to be extremely cautious and careful, at least in the near term, meaning that the immediate 5 to 6 years, eventually, I think humans have a very great capability to forget things. But that being said, we're already seeing some of those items come to play, right? An example is immunity passports to track immunizations, for example. The only way out of this is when we know that we have inoculated a number of people with viable and efficient vaccine, and then tracking those individuals very, very clearly. Establishing a system where our confidence to getting back to normal, right? As simple things as, getting on a plane or checking into a hotel. I spend 3 or 4 days of my week out of town in hotel rooms and on planes. I haven't traveled in the last 4 or 5 months, but it's actually scary to think about being able to go back to a hotel room. What's been the process? Did they disinfect it properly? Was there a sanitization? Who slept in that room earlier? Who was sitting in the chair before I got there onto the plane? So all of these things become very, very essential, right? I think, the world is going to need that. So that is another place where, we're going to see a heavy thing. A strong consequence, albeit an unfortunate consequence of the pandemic, has been the economic toll it has had world over. The world's economies have fallen into the grips of recession, starting with the US, Europe, India, and governments around the world are actually, responding very, neatly by providing a lot of stimulus packages and incentives for driving or kickstarting the economy. Now, at the same time, there is a big fraud problem also. Just take the example of the 1.5 trillion stimulus package that was passed in the US a few months ago. It has created an economy for fraud where individuals who are not eligible for or who are not even authorized to claim the stimulus funds, which is $1,200 monthly check, they've been starting to do that. So governments need a more transparent, trusted, and effective way of dispersing funds so that it goes to the right hands, which then trickles up and gets the economy going. Again, blockchain is another place. Governments, many state and federal agencies within the US are already thinking about that. So in essence, right, I think in a world where everything is becoming limited, supplies of all things become limited, buyers are cautious, trust is no more a nice to have thing, but it is a necessity for business model. Blockchain becomes a central part of it. And I always tell that no technology, if you think about any of the modern technologies that have taken by a huge wave of success and adoption, has been done isolated or independently, right? The brilliance of networking and internet has had a very profound impact, because we were able to use, and I still remember, a 56K modem to dial in when the phone line was not allowed, and you had to dial in. But that was brilliant because you were able to log in from South India and try and see what's happening on a website in the US or somewhere else. That brilliant technology has just exponentially grown with the advent of the cell phone, smartphone. So it's at the combination. It's not a surprise. It is not any, it's not unusual that many of the large, seismic shifts in the ways of our lives happen when multiple technologies come together. And internet and smartphones is one such example of that. Then automatically innovation happens around 4G and now 5G and, broadband connection, and then, amazing set of phones that are available and so on and so forth. I think blockchain is one such thing, right? Independently, it's a core technology, right? It's, to a large extent, it's a backend technology. How many of us think about databases? But every single thing that we do, when you pick up the phone and call your customer service for the bank, somebody is looking up a database. You call your school and ask for something, somebody is looking up a database. But that is such an intrinsic part of the the fabric of technology today. I think blockchain as a core technology will become like that, and it's at the combination or intersection of artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, that is going to form the basis for the future. A future where it is more efficient and more robust. Right? A future where it's not enough for a supply chain. Supply chain meaning being able to source, let us say, the most efficient way to source tomatoes in Greater Noida area. Today, a lot of things is about what is the most efficient way of getting it. Maybe if I buy the tomatoes in southern India and ship them over a cargo aircraft, I'd get the best bang for the buck. But then it's not resilient, because what if the airlines go down, or what if that particular single market where the growers are there have some cyclone or something. So it becomes an increasingly important thing for supply chains to be resilient, not just efficient. A lot of things like customer service cannot just be leading in the industry, but it also needs to be pandemic resistant. Governments are not just required to be citizen-centered, but they have to have the ability to be agile and respond to uncertainties. This is one such example that we're seeing now in 2020. Perhaps there are other things that happens. Now, all of this in the world comes with trade-offs, right? Nothing in the world comes for free. Every single thing has a cost to it, and there's a trade-off. And that's true with blockchain also. One might argue, and rightly so, that look, if I put a blockchain, it's multiple systems, it's decentralized, it's multiple nodes, there's more compute, there's more storage. What about all of those things? Yes, they're all valid. And therefore, that is the reason if I have to make a phone call to my brother, I don't think it makes sense to use a blockchain behind it, because some of those things are not relevant. But what is very important is, as we think about rupees and dollars as the currency today, through which we transact, we store value, we prepare and plan for our retirement, we prepare and plan for our education, parents prepare and plan for their kids and their livelihood. That currency in the future is going to go beyond just that green currency into a trust economy. Essentially, how trusted are you? And that currency can eventually be used as trust itself as a currency in a future. So blockchain in general, this is my prediction, that it will become a fabric of the economy itself, where you don't even know and feel it, but it is essential for everything. It'll become like gravity. Yeah, how many people know that there is gravity? Yeah, I think when you ask, you will know about it. But in general, when you're driving, when you're walking, when you're taking a plane, when you're taking an auto rickshaw, any of those things, gravity has a role to play. And same is the case with blockchain. I think it will become a fabric of everything. And then finally, before I finish my talk and open, I want to remind everyone that if you look at the significant changes in the world and its consumption patterns, right? Back in the 80s, it was about core engineering such as mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, because those were the systems that were leading the change, driving automation in the sense that, driving automation in the factories, driving efficiencies in electric grid and whatnot. Therefore, at the time, mechanical and electrical engineers were required, and that's what the education world provided. Cut to the 90s, as the world started grappling with this information age, and as it has become apparent and inevitable that the world is going to eventually lead into a highly, highly digital world, the need for computer science engineers, both on the hardware and the software, computer science and information technology engineers, all of these things came into being. And the educational sector around the world, and more so in India, has very, very aptly responded to it by offering courses and curriculum for students along those things. Now, I think in this decade, in 2020, I think the new age technologies such as blockchain, IoT, AI, machine learning, augmented reality, virtual reality, these are going to be the future. These are going to be where the developments of the world are going to happen. This is where the consumption is going to happen in around the world, and therefore a very high need for skills to be aligned accordingly. And I'm very proud and excited that Priyanka, along with the rest of the Noida Institute of Engineering and Technology, is actually forward thinking in that sense and trying to look at curricula that are different from your traditional set of things, because you need to be prepared by the time you finish your 4-year undergrad degree to be able to go and start being productive and adding value to the economy, versus having another bridge training and whatnot, because of a very huge difference between your skills that you acquired in the 4 years versus what is required in the market. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Priyanka. I hope I covered it enough at the length, and it's just going to be a question of whether I was successful in explaining the value of blockchain without a slide. So just share your feedback, and I'm open to take any questions you may have. I think, Priyanka, you might be on mute.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shrikant. You surely were able to cater the things we had in our mind, and it has been such a interesting and informative talk. I'm sure now the missing dots have been connected for our attendees. So the knowledge, experiences, especially the use cases and real examples that you shared today shall contribute to their knowledge. And thank you so much for the kind words. So I think we can take some of the questions from our audience. So one of the question that I have got from social, Ruhi Qureshi is asking, can you help with the idea of how does blockchain and artificial intelligence work together?
Yeah, that's a very important question. That's a very brilliant question. Let's just go back to the first principles, right? What is artificial intelligence? I think at its foundational stage, artificial intelligence is pretty simple as, thinking about predicting the future first, based on some of the data that has been there in the past. So just take my example. Based on what food I am taking and based on how much medicine, insulin I am taking, you could build a system that predicts what my blood glucose levels are going to be when I wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock. That's a pretty straightforward, not even an artificial intelligence system, but that's a predictive system. Now, add to that stuff that is related to my day-to-day living, stuff that is related to my lifestyle, stuff that is related with my work and the stress that comes along with it, environmental factors such as rain and wind and pollen and whatnot, and bringing a multiple set of these data together to come up with a model that then predicts a multitude of things, right? Not just blood glucose, but perhaps figuring out what's the likelihood that this gentleman might fall sick in 6 weeks from now because of a travel that he is planned to do to China or something else. Artificial intelligence, the way I would think or define it is, being able to predict and being able to forewarn things that are otherwise, ideally something that will happen and are witnessed by humans. Now, when you think about it, right, the bare bones of that is data. There is no artificial intelligence without any data. If you don't have, any number of models, right, you take in machine learning, and AI sort of is a superset of machine learning, and analytics is sort of superset of all of those things. But any model that you build, the first and foremost thing to build a model is have a set of data. And then you have to train the model on that data and say that now that you've trained in such and such thing, go ahead and apply the same thing for the future data that might come through. The link or the connection between AI and blockchain really is that data piece. Now, if you think about it, garbage in, garbage out is what AI will all be. If I put in bad data, or if I have historically bad data, then that's very likely to create bad predictions and therefore not so smart or intelligent artificial intelligence. Whereas if I have a trusted system where there is incentive in proper data, keeping it accurate, the bad actors are going to get kicked out because of the way in which they're acting through a distributed ledger or through a blockchain. What it means is that it's only going to incrementally and subsequently work with each other to help drive it further along. I think at a conceptual level, that is true. Now, in practice, if I take one simple example, right? Take the example of predicting where the pandemic is likely to happen, or where you're going to have an outbreak of COVID-19. I was just reading this article a few months back. There's a company that has that basically sells thermometers, temperature measuring machines, But the one thing that they have done is when you take the temperature, it not only shows it on that digital screen, but it has a small chip with which it can connect to the internet. And based on the geolocation, it will post that anonymously also. So before even Google, before even anybody could predict where the outbreak can happen, this company was saying that, look, in rural Oklahoma, the next outbreak is going to happen because they've been seeing temperatures going up and up and up and up and up in that area. So that's intelligence. That's predicting what's happening. Now that's possible because of the IoT link, because of the data. Now, put bad actors into it who want to either fraud the system, game the system, or cause problems for a nation. Then you can actually have a system where this kind of data is being faked or fraudulently put. But that's where blockchain comes into play, right? Where you have a trusted system, and that's just one example of practically what's happening today, where you can bring some of these technologies, right? A distributed ledger, an IoT device, and then on top of that, artificial intelligence. Boom, you're doing something very simple but very powerful.
Okay, so thank you for simplifying these terms in such an easy way for us. So I'm sure Ms. Ruhi, along with other attendees, is clear with the idea on the convergence of artificial intelligence and blockchain. So another question we have, it's like we have a lot of questions on how blockchain has changed the world. You've already spoken about how it is impacting in terms of business and opportunities. So do you want to add something on how it is changing the world in terms of job market?
Yeah, I think it's hard to exactly say, especially in a time when there is a pandemic and we're seeing a decrease in the demand for everything. But that being said, I think as you think about the recovery, which is likely to happen perhaps later this year and run through next and 2022 and 3. One thing is for sure is that the jobs that existed pre-COVID will not exist in the same shape post-COVID. And that's because of all the things that I talked about, systems being resilient, trustworthy, trust becoming a fabric of the business itself and not necessarily something that is independent, and all of those things. I think this was an analysis done by LinkedIn prior to COVID, but LinkedIn predicted that in 2020, prior to COVID outbreak, that blockchain skills were going to be on the highest demand and will fall short in terms of the supplies for a good set of 2 years or so, because the industry is going to need that much of the skill. However, the supply of engineers, supply of specialists on that is not going to be anywhere close to what is the demand. Now, from a very, very narrow view of the job market itself, I think all of these new technologies, blockchain, 5G, AI, IoT, all of these emerging technologies will become the bedrock of the future. Therefore, if you jump into the emerging technology boat, it is likely to create a good sustained career path for you, which obviously is going to be needing some skilling up as you go along your career, but will put you on the right trajectory. Now, from a global perspective, what is blockchain going to do? I think there's always this question about, will blockchain solve for world hunger? Will blockchain solve all the fraud in the world? My answer to that is no. No systems will do it. Nothing is likely to do it. The only important thing to note about blockchain is that it will reduce the fraud. It will reduce likelihood of system being gamed by a small set of people. It's difficult in an economy where everything is driven by the individual, driven by the buying patterns and the buying power of the individuals, it's difficult to say that you can create a what is a just or a fair system. But what blockchain gets you is closer to that, because control is not centralized. Control is more decentralized, and that's the critical part of it.
Thank you. Your answer has definitely given us more clarity about the opportunities with blockchain. So another question from our attendees is, there have been many reports of blockchain or bitcoins being stolen. So is it possible to hack a blockchain?
Yeah, it's possible to hack everything. I don't think it's always possible to hack any system. It's just that the question is, how difficult is it, and what's the damage? While I think the aim of security experts everywhere around the globe is to have a foolproof system that is completely safe, the reality of that is all the steps that you take are mitigating steps, which are doing one of the two things, or rather two things, right? Which are reducing the probability of an attack. That could be anything. And the second thing is minimizing the impact of that attack. So take the example of a safe that you have at a bank where you put your gold in India. What are you doing when you do that, right? When you do that, what you're saying is that I am taking the risk of somebody breaking into my house and stealing my gold or jewelry and putting it in the bank, which has a safe and security and whatnot. That doesn't mean, or that doesn't say that it is completely eliminating the possibility of somebody stealing that unlawfully. It still exists. It just reduces that. Now think about the same thing where if your gold is broken down into, let's say you have 10 grams of gold, it's broken down into 1 gram each and stored in 10 different safes in the same city. Now what you're doing is, what is the likelihood of all of the 10 banks getting getting stolen or getting infiltrated at the same time? And of that, what's the likelihood that your 1 gram in each one of those things going off? Now you spread that across the country, one in each state, you further minimize the risk. Think of blockchain in the same way. Yes, Bitcoin will get hacked. There are some examples, and I think there are good reasons why it got hacked, and there are explanations of what happens and all of those things, around private keys and whatnot, which is actually in and of itself a very deep topic. But the idea in general is that a decentralized system, while it has the additional cost of managing the infrastructure for that decentralized system at multiple places, it does minimize the chance of a bad or an attack happening, first thing. And the second thing is, when the attack happens, it reduces the impact of that.
That's correct. So, Mr. Shrikant, when we are talking about Bitcoin, I wanted to ask you, can Bitcoin become world's reserve currency?
Yeah, this is, again, all of this presentation, this talk is just my personal views and opinions. By the way, I should have given the safe harbor notice up front. My personal opinion is that no. People who will have different points of view about it. I think I am an optimistic skeptic about cryptocurrencies. In my opinion, I think a cryptocurrency become the reserve currency of the world is probably ways away. If not impossible, it is definitely a long way out for a couple of reasons, right? I think the established world financial system, in which certain countries and certain geographies have the incentive of whatever is the reserve currency, are less likely to make that happen, first thing. Second thing is this concept of trust, this concept of knowing how to store the value knowing how to store your sweat for a period or a rainy day is something that is innate to our brains. You know, and I was, you know, I think some time back when I was talking about this, I was giving the example about my grandmother who now passed away, but she, who was probably, who would have been 98 or something right now, in her own mind, was born pre-independence and whatever, right? She had the concept of money that was clear in her head. She had the concept of how do I store the hard work that I do in my 30s and 40s, which then allows me to live a life that is a little bit stable and whatever when I hit 60 or 70 is there. And that manifests in different ways for different people, right? I think for most of Indians, more so dominantly South Indians, I'm guessing, it could be gold, in that, you know, how much gold do you have? Because people think that it's the reserve. In other people's minds, as you expand and as you grow and as you see the world differently, it might be different. You know, I for one think about US dollar now as that, where I think that, you know, if I save $1,000, I know what I can get for $1,000, give or take, you know, some in the next 5 years, which means that I know what to do with it when I store it. More smarter people will think about, economists will think about a basket of currencies. It could very well be that cryptocurrencies will become part of that initially. But I think the world completely moving to a crypto powered Bitcoin kind of a thing is less likely to happen. It has its own economic challenges also, right? Environmental challenges in terms of mining and whatever. And there's a supply demand challenge there once it gets to a point where mining is not beneficial anymore, because, you know, it's all dependent on the scarcity of the currency, right? So there's only 20 million Bitcoins to be mined. It then gets to a point where it becomes less beneficial, and then automatically it will fall down. I know it's not a convincing answer, but that's my opinion.
No, thanks for letting us know your opinion on this question. It surely has enlightened the attendees. So I have got another question from attendees. I'm so sorry about asking so many questions from you today. So it's an interesting one. So it's one of the attendees is asking, for becoming a successful blockchain professional like you, what kind of challenges a person has to face, or some of the challenges which you have faced in your journey?
Yeah, so first thing is, I don't know if I'm a very successful professional of blockchain, but I think you know, what I'll say is two things. In any technology, right? Be it blockchain or be it anything, as you venture into the world of business, as you begin your career, there are two key things that stand between a wider adoption, stand between you and success. The first one is usefulness, which is about explaining the benefits of any technology in clear, concise, and simple terms, right? With blockchain, there's a lot of challenge in actually explaining that. However, you know, you can be, in my opinion, you will be successful regardless of whether you're a developer or a tester or a system engineer or a system architect or whatever your role might be, technical or business, keeping in mind the usefulness of the technology and articulating the benefits of that, right? So if I'm talking about, let us say, the security screening at airport in India, how does it happen today? In most airports, not in all, but most airports, you gotta have the boarding pass. You have to show the boarding pass. They'll put it on there. They'll scan your body, touch you, and then finally put a stamp on it. Yeah, is there a way to take some new technologies and apply there and minimize the touch of the individual, or need for a paper, and all of those things? Yes. You have to articulate the usefulness of the technology from the point of view of the end consumer, or where the value is getting created. That is very important. The second thing is, always remember that there is a technology debt. And what I mean by technology debt is, everything in this world has a system in which it works. Very rarely do you have systems where completely new things come into play. For example, having a rocket go to Mars and come back might be a new system. Although, one can argue that that is also a system built on, the 60s technology of going to moon and coming back. But there is a technology burden, right? Technology burden in that case being that, well, it's a chemical rocket. It's an impulse rocket. It has, certain constraints and limitations. And any new technology is going to be compared against that. So when for you to become successful in anything that you do, always think about how will I answer the question? But we've been doing it in this way forever. Explain how the new system, which is a combination of technologies, which is a concept or a new idea or a new framework, how might that be different and useful at the same time?
Okay, thanks for the advices. I'm sure this conversation has answered many similar kind of questions that must have arisen in the mind of our attendees. So thank you for all the answers. I would like to thank you for your time to share your thoughts and experiences. Your power excellence is visible, and all the participants should consider themselves lucky to listen to you live. Thanks for clarifying and help us increase the initial understanding on blockchain and also talking about the industry best practices with blockchain. I'm sure students are yearning to know more in times to come. So thank you for giving us such a wonderful time.
Thank you very much, Priyanka, for the opportunity. I really appreciate your, you showering all these nice words on me. But I think I've just shared a few things that I know, which may or may not be true, or may not be 100% accurate. But the power lies in these young students and talent that is yet to create the new Facebook of the world. That is yet to create the Twitters and the Googles of the world. So. Good luck for everyone. Thank you again for the opportunity, and have a nice weekend. I appreciate you taking your Friday afternoon and listening to me patiently.
Thank you. You too have a good day. So dear all, I hope you all have enjoyed the session. We'll be sending you the webinar recordings along with the feedback forms within 24 hours from now, and you shall be receiving a certificate for participation soon. I would also like to update that we'll have our next webinar of Career Series 2020 on 11th August on the topic Career Opportunities in Data and Cloud, and we'll be sharing the registration details soon. So stay tuned with us. Thank you for joining everyone today. Don't forget to subscribe to NIT on YouTube and Facebook so as to get latest updates. Hope to see you soon again. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm from TCS.
I'm from Wipro.
We are from NIT.
Join #1 Rank Institute, NIET Greater Noida. Get future ready.